Oh, I guess maybe we start with some brief announcements. Probably the biggest one that we're preparing to launch our fall season of seminars, but we have an in-person mixer coming up on September 25th. If you haven't already, please go register. We'll be co-hosting with Hendel Architects. They were gracious enough to host us this year. And so, yeah, if you haven't already, go and register. I'll be sure to put our website link in the chat as well for those that don't have it handy. That's actually the biggest announcement we have right now. We'll load more of the fall and spring season that is upcoming onto the website as it unfolds. But for now, we just love to see you in person for a change. And other than that, we can, yeah, launch into our program for tonight with a brief intro of how we all connected with Jen, Tara, and Ali. Anik, would you like to? I know I kind of interjected there. Would you like to take that part?
I'm sorry, I'm still my head in the Zoom.
No worries. So, well, what I will say is, I'm not sure if anyone on this call joined us. We had a lovely walkthrough of the alloy block with Jen. I forget now. I had to have been spring or maybe even, yeah. And it was a treat, and it was kind of the first of its kind for MWA to host a project tour and done by an architect slash development team. I mean, Alloy is unique in the sense that they are developers, but they are a team of architects, and it is architecture and design forward and focused development. And they were gracious enough to take some of our mentees and us and tour us through a property just as it was wrapping construction and getting ready to welcome tenants. And so that was, I mean, I think I know Nancy has a connection to
I do.
one.
So
Yeah.
I first met Jared Della Valle in 1995.
Wow.
He was actually working in construction, managing the
Right.
delivery of an incredibly high-end townhouse for a very wealthy guy on Park Avenue or Madison Avenue and 63rd Street, I think, maybe 64th. And then worked with him and Andy Bernheimer in their architecture firm, Della Valle Bernheimer, in 2006. And at the time, met AJ and saw the launching of Alloy. And of course, many, many architects aspire to development. That's no mystery, but few get to do it, and even fewer manage to accomplish it on such a grand and successful scale. So I imagine that's about as useful an introduction, or as much introduction as is needed at the point to pass off to you three ladies.
Yeah, sure.
Because
That's
of
awesome.
course, I left off quite a while ago, and I'm eager to hear about what's happened recently.
I love that. Sure. Yeah, let me just start sharing here, but while I do that, Tara, Ali, introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name's Tara. I'm the director of marketing, leasing now, and sales at Alloy, but I am a licensed architect as well.
And I'm Ali Militano. I'm the director of construction at Alloy. I studied architecture. I am not a licensed architect, but I have the background in that, so we'll talk a lot about that.
That's awesome. And I'm Jen Grosso. I'm the director of architecture here. Are you guys all seeing my screen nice and big? It says Alloy on it.
Yes, we are.
Excellent. Well, I thought we'd start just with like a little bit about Alloy and the work that we're doing now. Just kind of, I think it'll set the stage pretty well to talk about like how we work together, what we care about, what we value in our work. And I think that also extends to our careers. But in general, just for those who are new to Alloy, or like the concept of Alloy, I suppose, we are a design-led development company, and our company is guided by a mission, and that mission is to make Brooklyn beautiful, sustainable, and equitable. And it's really with this collective goal in mind that we work across multiple disciplines. We do our own acquisitions, we source our own capital, we're responsible for all of our own design, branding, and marketing. We see our projects through documentation and kind of the traditional architectural sense. We've historically done construction, and more recently have gotten into the business of asset management as we've moved into larger rental properties. So really the way we think about it is we will take on whatever scope we need to that gives us the ability to create value for a project. And the company is about 18 years old in general, although there's, as Nancy was saying, kind of earlier iterations with Della Valley Bernheimer that was mostly an architectural project. And we're about 20 people now. So, we're relatively small for the scope that we take on. And of that 20 people, maybe 18 or so actually are trained architects in some regard, have a P-Arch or an M-Arch. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, actually. I think that's better. Awesome. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll try. So a lot of us are trained architects, but we're also brokers and analysts and engineers. So we're really pulling from a really broad collective toolkit. And we think that this has enabled us to kind of create value with more nuance and more complexity in our projects, often per our mission for great public benefit. And while all of the decisions in the office are made collectively, right, we operate as one company. We have one meeting where decisions and conversation will wander from development strategy to kind of design solutions to sales and leasing factors. The legal structure of Alloy actually looks something like this. It's incredibly complex. And this is really because of the legal legacy of how buildings have historically come to be in the States. It's segmented and separated up to kind of parse out risk and liability based on very narrow scopes. So operating, especially in our early work, which is largely smaller condos, we were often construction manager, owner, and architect. So a change order might look something like this, right? Where it's like the same signature 3 times in a row. The duplication of efforts is really kind of, it annotates the risk we are willing to take on. We want to basically be able to have a say in how a project gets executed, how the finances are distributed, and what the design ultimately looks like. And we think that together, by taking on this more expanded scope, we're able to make smarter and more efficient decisions. So why take all of this complexity on? And it's really about what I was just saying, right? It's like kind of how do you think about defining the program, the priorities, and the problem of the project that you want to solve? Because we're doing everything from acquisitions to leasing and marketing and now asset management, we have to live with a project for a while. It's going to take up a lot of our collective time. And we really are only so big that we do one project at a time. So we want to be selective and we have to believe in the ultimate value of a project. What's on the screen here is actually this little software that we built really early on. So you're seeing Dumbo and a little bit of downtown Brooklyn, all of the sites in the neighborhood, which our office is, and historically we've operated, right? We're looking at a lot of work at once and really selecting one project out of very many to actually execute on and see through. We found that drawing from this collective toolkit has really, and as I said it before, has enabled us to create more value for great public benefit. Our work tends to offer this value proposition, which is really the central thesis. And it really requires us to all kind of be a swift army knife. We have to get good alignment in very discrepant values, right? Economic value in the traditional sense, the value of design, the value for it provides to communities. This one example on the screen, I think, is often how a lot of people come to know Alloy. This is One John. It's in Dumbo on the waterfront. It's a condominium project that actually began with an RFP for the Brooklyn Bridge Park. The park at the time was looking for a way to kind of create a endowment or to increase their endowment to pay for the perpetual maintenance of the park. And they had basically parceled out this site and ran an RFP, that which we won. And it's kind of a good example of this, of how the design, the financial structuring, and call it the marketing all came to be, right? I think here, the economic benefit for investors, when we first underwrote this project, it was something like $900 a square foot, and it sold for around $1,400. We were able to achieve what I consider to be very elegant design, right? And we had inverted some traditional marketing values. Historically, it's all about views at the top, and you're really prioritizing the top of a tower. Here, you see the gradient kind of inverts that for the units on the bottom. And I think it creates a pretty elegant and kind of cohesive design. And it's created public benefit, if you will, relative to what it contributes to the park. So I think it's an example of like a relatively mature Alloy project that kind of shows the synthesis of these kind of different and distorted meanings of value that all kind of get intertwined in Alloy's work.
Jen,
we
can
really-
you mention the completion date on this?
So Tara, you might know better. Is this around 2015?
2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think up until that point, all of the work that Alloy has done has been in Dumbo, right? Our office, I'm sitting here in 20J. There was a saying for a really long time, you know, we don't really develop farther than we can walk because it takes time and it takes nuance to understand the complexities of the site that you're in and to understand the desires of the owners around you and to like really understand the needs of the community. And it was really here in condominium land in Dumbo that we were operating up until 2015, 2016. And then we, you know, exotic for us, started to, you know, take a bike ride down to downtown Brooklyn, which is, I want to talk a little bit about the Alloy block, which has really been our work from, call it 2016 onward. So yeah, the Alloy block is currently under construction. We purchased a site in, I think, 2015, right, Tara? And it'll ultimately become what are 5 buildings in 2 phases. And we're just completing the first phase, which I'll talk about a little bit. But to give you a little bit of sense of context here, what you're seeing is Manhattan, obviously, to the north. And really, the site is on the eastern limits of the 2004 downtown Brooklyn rezoning to its west, but also Boerum Hill to the south. So it's really kind of negotiating with more commercial context to the north and residential to the south. It's also kitty corner from BAM on one side and Atlantic Terminal on the other. Like this is a very high volume distribution hub. And just to give a sense of density around Atlantic Terminal, right? I think it's like the 2nd largest transit hub in New York City. So it's a pretty varied context that the block negotiates. But to back up, maybe just because I think this is interesting and speaks to the complexity of the problems that we're interested in, I don't know, 2015, we had purchased a site on the block, and we were trying to figure out what to do with this site. And we knew that we had to go up, that we wanted to add bulk to it. And there was a school adjacent to us on this block. It's the Khalil Gibran International Academy. It's New York City's only dual Arabic English public school. And, you know, schools tend to not get any taller. So we approached them to see if they wanted to sell any air rights. And the way that Khalil Gibran works is it's actually managed by the Education Construction Fund. The ECF is like this 1960s era entity that's really tasked with developing and repositioning New York City's public school assets. So we approached them and they kind of were like, hey, this current project, although it's 150 years old and it's beautiful, it's not really appropriate to modern day learning. You know, it's not up to SCA standards. It's not ADA accessible. So what they were really interested in was actually kind of a more modern school to increase the public school seats for the area. So actually with that task in mind, they issued an RFP and a proposal. Our proposal ultimately won that. So we created a public-private partnership with them and went about aggregating what will then become the Alloy block that you can kind of see here. The Department of Education, the Khalil Gibran is to the west, Alloy to the right. And really, I think it's this kind of public-private partnership that has created a lot of power relative to the block's agency for downtown Brooklyn. So yeah, when we aggregated the block, we went into a process called ULURP, which is really about rezoning the area. And with that, we had kind of 2 tasks in mind, right? We obviously knew that we wanted to produce more public school seats. But the other thing in downtown Brooklyn is that there is an immense need for density. It shouldn't surprise anyone that here in New York City, that New York has an incredible housing crisis, that 50% of all households are either moderately or severely rent burdened. So this is particularly exacerbated with the lower AMI. So we knew that we'd be focusing on adding housing, or we wanted to focus on adding housing, including affordable housing to the area. So this is what you're seeing on the left is really kind of the longer term schedule for the first phase, where in 2017 or 2015 to 2017, we worked to aggregate the block. And then we went through this rezoning in 2017, 2018. And the list on the right is really, a series of meetings that we had with different stakeholders. These are local electeds in downtown Brooklyn. These are residents nearby. These are historical societies. These are community groups. And this is really like a very robust outreach process to understand what the needs and the desires of the people who have stake in the urban environment around the block needed. And this was all like taken into account and became part of, call it, the ultimate proposition for the block. We started demolition and kind of got into it all in 2019, 2020, and we're really just wrapping up. I think we just got our last TCO for the tower like this month, right, Ali? So it's a really long trajectory. And like I was saying before, we spent a long time with the project. And because of that, we find really kind of efficient ways to kind of negotiate the different stakeholders' investments because it should matter to everybody. All right, so this is like the ultimate, call it, massing of program and geometry within the sweater that we created with ULURP. The first phase includes a tower and 2 schools, which I'll kind of zoom in on just to talk about like the economic engine of it all. Here's what we're seeing on the left is the all-electric tower. We'll get into a little bit more. And then on the right, 2 public schools. So the economic engine of this works where the Education Construction Fund had to raise a bunch of capital to pay for the schools. And because ECF is a public entity, they have the ability to float bonds, right, to basically raise the capital through the sale of bonds to pay for the construction. So they were responsible for that, while Alloy was responsible for sourcing equity and debt for the construction of the tower. The tower is open shop. Because it's a private development. The schools are prevailing wage built with union labor because of the public nature of the project. And the project is structured kind of as a ground lease, wherein the Education Construction Fund effectively owns income from a portion of the tower, which they use to pay back bondholders. So it's kind of like they're seeing the income of rent and are basically paying back the mortgage to pay back the bondholders for the loan that had taken out to fund the school. Alloy and our capital partners see the income for the remainder of the tower, which is a very small, it's a smaller portion for it. But the ultimate benefit of that, which is I think what's interesting in the power of the public-private development, is that it affords or enables the construction of 2 public schools for 0 New York City taxpayer dollars, the kind of coupling of public and private in this manner. It requires density and requires a belief in density for downtown Brooklyn, but you see the public benefit of that by the construction of the school, which I think is very powerful. So when we look at the value that the Alloy block creates, it's really in a series of domains, right? In kind of the architectural, the urban planning of it, we've created more land for school. In the nature of the affordability component of the tower, we've added something like 200 permanently affordable homes. When we are bringing on trades and people who will be working on the project, we were able to achieve very high WMBE targets. I think it's like 43% on the tower and 35% on the school. So like trying to use our agency as architect and developer to create a more equitable development in the way that it is constructed. And then ultimately the 230 million of public benefit that is the school, right? It's this kind of tangible value that the Alloy block is able to address. And it's really, I think, because of the interdisciplinary model that we have, we're really effective or efficient at coupling kind of discrepant incentives well to create better building solutions. And I think with that, Tara, if you want to kind of go into the design and like maybe the 2 kind of elements of phase 1, that would be awesome. Talk about the architecture of it and marketing.
So actually the TCO for the schools was received today.
Awesome.
And we are really excited for these schools to open up in the fall. There are 2 schools, PS 456, which is also called the Elizabeth Jennings School for Bold Explorers, which is a brand new elementary school. And then a new home for the KGIA, which is right next door currently, and they are actively moving over right now. So in total, that will bring about 800 seats to downtown Brooklyn, which is really exciting. When we started working on the project, we knew, there was going to be schools. We're architects, but we're not, we've never designed schools before. And we really wanted the design of the block to have each component to kind of have its own identity, similar to how any building or site would develop over time. So we partnered with ARO, Architecture Research Office, and ILA to design the schools. But we were still involved in, the management of the development and the construction of the project. So these schools will be the city's first passive house public schools, which is another really exciting achievement. When we first started the project, no one, told us, yeah, and you should, design these schools to be passive house. It was something that we felt we wanted to challenge ourselves, and the team working on it, to build better buildings for the future. So we gave our team and ARO and ILA the challenge of building the city's first passive house schools. And here we are today delivering that. So it's really exciting. Obviously, passive house buildings are more efficient. They create just better, healthier environments, and they also improve efficiency. So it's a win-win for the city and the inhabitants, healthier working environments. So this is a rendering of the school. We're about done with construction, so hopefully we'll have an image of this soon. But you can see here, this is the lower school entry, and you can't really see in this rendering, but there is a what's called a gymnatorium. So it's a gym and an auditorium in the lower school, and that will also be open to the community, so that they can use it for different local events. Yeah, this is the rendering of the gymnatorium, so you can see kind of State Street through those windows there. It's really beautiful space. We're excited that it can have multi-purpose, so it could be used by the schools, but also used by the community for other events. So the other component is 505 State Street, the first tower of the Alloy block, and it's mixed use. It has 440 apartments, 45 of which are affordable. There's 3,000 square feet of retail on the ground floor, and it is 44 stories. If you saw some of our earlier projects in those slides, like 1 John Street, this is, a huge scale jump for us, but really, really exciting. This image just shows the tower, and this is actually a photograph, I'm pretty sure. Actually, our renderings and photographs look the same, but this is a recent photograph we had taken, and it highlights just its location in downtown Brooklyn, adjacent to Atlantic Terminal. So what's really exciting about this tower is, like the schools, we set a goal early on. So what's really exciting is we're about to announce it's New York's first all-electric skyscraper, disconnected from all gas, right? And we are anticipating sourcing our energy through renewable local community solar. So we're really trying to make the project carbon neutral, which is super exciting. Back in just to kind of zoom backwards, back in 2020, when we first started kind of really designing and working on the project, there was a whole gas ban. National Grid was at loggerheads with the governor over approving the pipeline, and we asked ourselves, well, like, what would we do if we didn't get gas? And our consultants were like, well, actually, it's pretty simple. It's just an electric boiler and heat pumps. So that gave us kind of this whole concept of going all electric. And it's been, it wasn't as difficult to achieve, although we are the first electric boiler in the city, and it's super exciting that we've kind of gotten there and worked towards it. And we hope that now there'll be more buildings following in our path. But it was so essentially a position of development and design value that we kind of pushed to make into a reality. And then this is a photo of the exterior. It's a really high performance building facade. So it has triple paned glass, and it has both fixed and operable windows. Our building envelope is also very well insulated, so it helps improve acoustics along Flatbush Avenue, and then also the performance, the energy performance of the building. Everyone knows that, unfortunately, you know, gas, although it's not healthy for you, and it is cheaper than electric. So we tried to do as much as we could to make the building envelope very efficient, so that, you know, you don't need to run your heat pump as much as you would on a normal building. So our project has the typical amenities you would expect in a rental building in any, you know, city. It has a gym, it has a workspace, which you can see on the right. We actually have a pool, a lounge, but we also have this space on the left, which you can see here in this rendering, which is called the Grow Room. And it's meant to be a kind of tech-free meditation space. Literally, there's no Wi-Fi in the space. Like, leave your computer at home and just be in a space that's filled with plants. The temperature is a little bit more humid. We have these huge fans in the space. And interestingly, you know, where the building is more than 50% leased, and we are seeing that that is one of the most desired amenities. And it's been a comment on, you know, all of the tours that they really enjoy that space. So as Jen mentioned earlier, just to recap again, these are the kind of benefits that the project has delivered. Obviously, this is the first phase that was completed, and this is an actual image also of the project now. So you can see the schools. That's the high school side. So schools, affordable homes. Our phase 2 of this project will have more affordable homes than the first one. Equitable development, we achieved really high WMBE targets. We created new jobs and sourced local labor. We didn't spend any capital dollars. And basically it's over $230 million of public benefit. And obviously we're trying to create one of the most sustainable blocks in Brooklyn. So last slide here, beyond the immediate kind of obvious benefit, we see even more valuable is like the communication of these goals, the electric tower and the passive house schools, and how communicating that to the local development community, and showing and proving that actually there's great value in doing these things. People want to live in all electric buildings. We actually had a tenant that sought us out because we had induction cooktops. So I think that's another value that's not as evident, but it's something that we're really excited about.
Hell yeah.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do some decision making and how we create value across the multiple disciplines that we have within our company. So as architects and developers, we have control on how to allocate the budget and where to spend that money. One thing that I think is like our most basic, easy check is to always look back to our mission. So is it something that's helping us achieve beauty, sustainability, or equity? And we have a couple examples here that I could point to in pictures. One thing that you can't see in photos that I want to make sure we talk about, which goes back to a lot of like the equity that Tara was just talking about in community, is that we have in this building market rate units as well as affordable units. And as the developer, we made the decision that the finishes and everything should be exactly the same across the board, and that we wouldn't, that there's plenty of buildings where developers will use different materials in or different appliances in the affordable rate units, because as they're not bringing in as much income, but we felt that it goes more with our ethos to keep people across the board. I'm just gonna mute whoever that is, sorry.
Mhm.
Did you get it? Okay. So some things that I could show you in pictures that are ways that we make decisions. So just like for a little bit, like we mentioned our titles, and you'll hear more about us individually after this, but so I'm the director of construction, Tara is focused on marketing, and Jen is architecture and design. So between the three of us alone, we have a lot of different like competing interests, I would say. I'm definitely more focused on the cost, the construction cost of it, or potentially the lead time. If it's a material that's gonna take a year for us to procure, is that like we're not gonna get it in time, we're gonna delay construction. And Tara would be, you know, pushing, this is what the tenants want. And so between the three of us, especially, we have to like figure out, it's like always making sure that like one of us we're achieving that one of our goals. And so we each have like different parts that we weigh in on decisions. So some things that we could show you in this photo, you can see the exposed concrete ceilings. So in all of our residential units, our living areas and bedrooms, we left with exposed concrete. This is, I like it from the cost side because it definitely saved on cost. It's, you know, you're using less materials, it's less labor to just leave the concrete raw. It's also more sustainable for that same matter of not introducing more materials where you don't need. And then Tara was able to work it into the marketing and made it a really strong selling point for bringing tenants through. And now that people are living in it, they love it. And we've been getting great feedback on it. So it actually worked well for all of us. So that was like one of our favorite, I think, decisions that we made in this process. The next photo you can see here, this is our kitchen, which one of Alloy's staple things is like these beautiful column kitchens, clean lines, minimal lines. And so we always do panel ready appliances, which is not something that you see often in rental buildings. It definitely does cost more. So again, this is coming from the marketing standpoint of what can make us stand out that you're not getting in other rentals typically. So that would be, you know, coming from Tara and then falls into my lap of, okay, how can we make this work within our budget? So we just, you know, put the time in to find the right resource to get the best material that we could for the best costs and make our apartments beautiful. Go to the next one. And then this last one, which we have kind of touched on, we've mentioned multiple times, it's the first all electric tower. We wanted to figure out little ways to kind of remind the tenants of this when they're living there, and something that they see and have to kind of touch every single day. So we incorporated smart thermostats. This one is an Ecobee thermostat. It has the ability that you can, you know, create settings for different times of day so that you're not accidentally leaving, you know, 69 degrees on when you're away at work all day. Or, you know, you can also set it to overnight to be a little bit cooler, and it has these comfort settings. And then in demand response events from Con Ed, we have the ability to, it first like pumps out a lot of cold air before the demand response time, and then it raises the temperature. And because of our high performance facade, we're able to retain that cooler air. So tenants are much more comfortable without using as much energy, which is great. So this was, I think, all around from like all of the different disciplines within our company, we were all really excited about this and introducing a new technology. So this is one of our amenity spaces, and I'm actually going to talk about, we went through a lot of VE, which is value engineering, for our amenity spaces. This was a very challenging one for us because we are very design forward, of course. But I think the most challenging thing is how can we achieve the same look and feel while also saving some money? Unfortunately, like amenity spaces don't bring in as much money as units do, but they are important for tenants overall. You know, that's what a lot of people are renting buildings for, the amenities. So we still want to make these spaces beautiful, but we went through a long process of how to achieve that same thing and making some small decisions to some tweaks to help save more money. But spending the money where we want to. So again, like we spent a lot of money on like the facade. You can see here the terrazzo flooring, definitely more money at the beginning, but overall then it's a more durable product. So for a rental building especially, we have like more longevity out of it. So these are some ways that we make decisions on beauty and just marketability down the line. So sorry, Jen is rushing me.
Sorry, Ali.
I was gonna say, like, there's a couple other things, like small tweaks you can make, like it's as simple as like changing a hardware spec, saving some money, but not, you know, taking away from the space. And yeah, we can go into our about us portion.
Awesome. Tara, you're up.
Okay, I was a little, when I looked at this timeline, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm old. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, so I'll walk through the timeline, and just my path to where I am today was definitely not straight. Took a lot of different turns, and when I was young, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do and how I would utilize kind of my interests, but I think it all kind of worked out, and I obviously love what I do. So I'm not your traditional architect that always knew that they wanted to be an architect. I grew up in Long Island in the suburbs and really loved going into Manhattan and the city. So I ended up going to NYU, not really sure of what I wanted to do, had to declare a major, ended up, my sister like sat down with me and was like, hey, oh, what are you gonna do? And I love cities, and they had this metropolitan studies major, so I studied in that, and I felt like economics was just a good thing to do, so I did that. While I was there, I had this great internship at the Department of City Planning, working under, at the time, the director was Bashan Chakrabarti, if any of you know him. He's extremely talented and was really inspirational while I worked there. It was also during kind of the 9/11 memorial, the High Line, so all these like major projects, but I felt like they were like super far out. Interestingly, at the time, most of the people that worked there were architects. And at the time, I was thinking I was going to maybe go back to be a city planner or something like that. But then I realized, well, I kind of questioned that. And upon graduation, I still was kind of unsure of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to get just another experience. So I landed a job in Brooklyn at this place called the Developers Group. They were a real estate company, startup, kind of a brokerage and consulting for residential development. And I thought, hey, it seems interesting. It's like did some work at the public sector. Maybe I should give this a try, see what the private sector is like. Brooklyn at the time was not what it is today. I was the only person kind of heading to work in Brooklyn at the time. But it had just started. People were really excited about it. So we were working with very kind of inexperienced developers and architects, but maybe not like the best caliber. So I also learned like, man, there should be better development happening and also, better architecture. So while I was there, I realized, I think I might be interested in doing architecture. But before committing to a master's program, which is a lot of effort and time, especially in architecture school, and money, I wanted to make sure. So I did this 6-week intensive program at the GSD called Career Discovery, which was amazing. I really loved every minute of it, and then decided to go to architecture school. So I then went to Parsons here in the city, and got my master's of architecture. I had an amazing time there as well. Got to participate in a design workshop where we worked with the New York City Parks Department to build new pool pavilions up in Washington Heights. And we designed it, we built it, and we actually raised money for the project through Kickstarter. So it was a really awesome experience. And then upon graduation, I was offered a job at the architecture firm that I was interning at. And I was gonna accept that. And just before that happened, interestingly, Jared Della Valle reached out to me. I forgot to mention this, but when I was at the developers group, I worked on an RFP and selected Della Valle Bernheimer Architects to work on a project that we were working on in Williamsburg. The project never happened, but I did meet Jared and kind of knew him. He had reached out, he was starting, or Alloy had, been operating for a few years, but they were looking to kind of expand, and he was going to focus just on Alloy, and his partner was just going to focus on architecture. So at first I was like, well, I just went to architecture school. Should I, work for a development company? I was like, is that weird? Am I going to the dark side? And then meeting with him, I realized that, what they were trying to do is actually just really good design, good development. And ultimately I ended up at Alloy, where I am now. And when I first started, there were only 2 other employees, so it was really small. And we had to be really nimble and kind of do everything. So one of my first projects there was 185 Plymouth Street, which was a really awesome project that was a full city block long conversion of a warehouse building with new construction on top. And we literally cut a 40-foot courtyard in the middle, kind of like Gordon Clark style. So it was really exciting. And for my first really, architecture project, it was just really kind of fast-paced, hands-on, and learned a lot. Then, worked on the Dumbo townhouses, which were a really exciting ground-up construction project in Dumbo, which had this really cool ductile concrete facade, and they were also designed to be passive house. And then kind of over time, my role started to change. Probably around John Street, I started to get more involved in the marketing and sales of the projects, as well as the design. So my role kind of started changing then, and then kind of evolved into what it is today. John Street, I worked on not only the design of the building, but also worked on helping sell those units. So I would actually even meet with prospective clients, have my real estate license and all that. So it was a really great way to really explain to future homeowners what we did with the design, and having kind of that firsthand architect telling you about the place that you're going to purchase was really exciting. And I got to work on this Brooklyn Children's Museum Annex, which is not there today, but it is part of the Brooklyn Public Library. And then worked on another, more projects. During that time, I also had my first son, Henry, and a second son, Owen, in 2018. I also got my architecture license somewhere in between there. I suggest to everyone to get it before you have kids, but it didn't work out that way for me. But yeah, that's my history, and it's just been amazing to see Alloy kind of grow from working on, a loft building with 8 homes to now 440. And I'm super proud of like everything that we do, because we really care. We're not your average developer that just cares about, how much profit they're getting off the project. Like, we really care about what we're delivering to people, and we, stay true to our mission. So I'm really proud. My kids are proud. They point out, 505 State Street to their friends, and they're like, that's the building my mom built. And it's just, yeah, it's amazing to be a part of such a great team of people.
Okay, I'm next. So just as a reminder, I'm Ali. I'm the director of construction at Alloy. So like Tara was saying, I also just love cities, love how they function, how everything is connected. And I always think of architecture as being my gateway into that whole world. So to go back in time, growing up, I moved around a little bit, and I think, always seeing different homes. I like started drawing floor plans in second grade and didn't even know what architecture was. And then decided, started to learn more about it. And then I was very into art and architecture. So when I got up to college, I actually wasn't sure which one I was going to pursue. I applied for both. I applied to certain schools for art and certain for architecture, and then try to leave it to fate to tell me what I should do. But I got into Virginia Tech, which was like my dream school for architecture. So I felt like it was fate and I had to do it. So I initially started at Virginia Tech as just an architecture major. And after my first year, I missed art too much and decided to double major in fine arts and architecture, which is half completely insane and half incredible. Like, as most of you know, if you went through architecture school, the countless hours at studio, and just like go ahead and double that, because I honestly don't know how I survived. There was a lot of sleepless nights. But so after college, I think I ended up, as you could see, which I'll get to, going back, I actually did intern at an architecture firm while I was in school. I had fully planned on starting there full time when I graduated. But I was feeling a little bit burnt out, probably due to all the studio hours that I was spending. And I ended up getting an opportunity at Structure Tone, which is a construction management company. And it's like one of the top interior construction firms in New York City. And I felt like at that point, I was like, you know what, let me just take a shot. I really didn't think I was going to stay there. As you can see, I was there for 9 years. I thought I was just going to go there for a couple years, try it out, learn some things that was a little bit different, like learn more about structure and seeing the tangible side of it. And after 2 years, I was like, wow, I'm still learning. I'm not done yet. And so I didn't fully give up on architecture yet at that point, but I was like, I want to keep learning. I'm very interested. And it was a good way for me to get my hands on in like a bigger picture, because the architecture firm I was going to work at was single family homes. Whereas working in New York City, you're really part of like, you're working in high rises, or just, you're so much more integrated with that world. And that's really what was speaking to me. So I wasn't ready to leave there yet. I continued then. I worked there as a project engineer, which was like mostly on site, a site superintendent in the field. Then I went into estimating, which they always had this thing, like anyone who is an architect, we want to be an estimator because you understand drawings. So you can like dissect these drawings and understand the details and figure out the cost that goes into it. So I did have to learn all about the cost stuff, but knowing the drawings was helpful. And it was really fun for me to, I would get to meet with the architects more regularly and sit with them and go through like, what's your design intent here, and try to get on in early stages. So I really enjoyed that. And it was like very interesting to see someone else's drawings at a different stage and getting to kind of nitpick a little bit here and there. So I was enjoying that a lot. But however, as you could see, I have these like 2 timelines that are going. One is career timeline and one is the education timeline. I always, through this process, as I was learning and everything, there was still something like pulling me that I felt like I wasn't getting, I was like, there's still something missing. And it was really that, again, bigger picture. As working as a construction manager, it's amazing. You get to see a lot. I got to work in buildings like, 30 Rock and Hudson Yards, but it's still someone coming to you and telling you what to build. And I always felt like I wanted to be on the other side of the table, and I wanted to be the decision maker, or, on that team of decision makers, because again, because of my architecture background and because we love beautiful things, I always felt like there was a missed opportunity. And I'm like, why can't people care more about design? And I realized that, the developer is really the one that gets to decide all these things. So while I was still at Structure Tone, I went back to school for my Master of Science in Real Estate Development at NYU. Went part-time and continued to work, but kind of always knowing that I wanted to then go to a developer. But it took me, working at Structure Tone, working in construction management, meeting the developers, meeting the owners reps, and everyone like that to understand that that was an option. If you had asked me when at the end of high school if I was going to be a real estate developer, I honestly don't know that I would have known what it was. You know, there's just like not enough awareness on that. Like the developers that I knew growing up were just like the big housing complex that was like the cookie cutter houses that were all the same. And like, that's great, but that's not what I wanted to do. And so I didn't really know what it really meant. And it took, you know, getting into like a pivot into a different trajectory than architecture to really learn what all the options were out there. So then after I graduated, I actually learned about Alloy while I was in school. And was like, wow, what a cool company. Like that is, you know, that's so ideal. A company that does architecture and development. And at the time I was living in Chelsea and I was working also in Midtown. So my commute was like, you know, 2 minutes. And I was like, oh, too bad though. They're in Brooklyn. Like I can't go there. And then once I met them and realized like how much aligned these people were with like my same goals, I was like, no, 100% this is where I have to be. And it felt so like rewarding that after all that school that I went through to find someone that I agreed with and like wanted to build with. And it was super exciting. So I've now been at Alloy for 4.5 years. I'm the director of construction. So my job now it's in many ways very similar to what I was doing at Structure Tone, but it's different that it's on the other side of it. So I'm looking at the same thing, but with a totally different lens and perspective of being the owner. And it's good that I worked in construction that long because to be quite blunt, like I can call them on their bullshit. Like, you know, I'm like, I've been there, I've done that. I know what is like, I know what's right and wrong. So it's definitely been helpful to do that. And also to be just integrated in our company with Tara and Jen doing different disciplines. Like that's something that I would have never gotten to be exposed to. So that's where I'm at now. Oh, so this is a fun little timeline. I lived across the street from 505 State Street for the whole time during construction. So these are photos that I took throughout the construction process that you could see from my window in my old apartment. And I put this little timeline together once we topped out, and just thought it was really cool just to show the progress of that building since we talked a lot about it. And a fun fact is I now live in the tower. So I used to look at it every day and now I am sitting inside of it as we speak.
Were you the first resident?
I was not the first resident. I was the first one on my floor though, and I was the only one on my floor for about a month. So
Awesome.
yes.
Awesome. So here's my professional timeline. I got a B arc from Cornell. And then I did a bit of an internship at Groupon while I was there, but I really ended up at SOM. I thought I was going to be there for about a year. I'm like, okay, great, this will be great. And then I'll go get my master's. And, you know, I started in this competition team in Southeast Asia, and it was, you know, really interesting, but it was really a competition actually for New York where we ended up winning the competition. I ended up getting into the actual, call it like construction documentation for the first time of it all, where I really came into a studio that had a really big impact on me, and I learned very quickly in. So I was 1865 Broadway, and then I spent a really large amount of time working on Hudson Yards at SOM. SOM is an excellent place to learn how to become an architect. I think my experience there was very specific in that it was focused in the New York City studio, but also on development work, right? So like my clients were your classic developers. It's related in Avalon Bay. So it allowed me to get like a little bit of an understanding of like how that operates. I didn't want to be a developer, but it was like the context in which I found myself. Like I was very much like the architect for developers there. And it really kind of informed that. I just want to flip down to the second timeline, which is really like this second current of work, which I think is not talked about enough as like a really important like thread relative to growth and learning and education as you kind of are, especially in your early career. So through my internship at Shigeru Ban, I was introduced to Nina Friedman, who at the time was starting Architects with Lori Brown, which was a women in architecture group. And it really kind of aligned with a lot of kind of ways that I was like thinking about my own work within the context of SOM, but also my career writ large. And between architects, between the Urban Land Institute and eventually the Urban Design Forum, I was like always seeking ways to like broaden, I would say, what was an incredibly deep, rigorous education at SOM. And it's really where I started to understand to Ali's point, relative to like construction management and development and even investors, like how that ecosystem begins to work. And it was, I'd go to events and like my whole goal is like, how do I make one friend, right? Like, how do I make one friend who can have a serious conversation with about how this stuff happens? So it was kind of that seeking exercise, I think, outside of my more traditional architectural path that was, I think, in aggregate, very important to my kind of more broad understanding of architecture and development together. I got my license when I could. I also got a certificate in real estate investment while I was like early at Alloy, and that was really about creating additional understanding relative to how underwriting works and the technicalities to better help myself engage the kind of really what is a collaborative conversation. It's not segmented, to be able to like understand priorities from call it the more development lens. This whole time I was also teaching. Like I've taught studio at Boston Architectural College and professional practice at City College, and try to kind of engage juries where I can, just as a way to like revisit blue sky and kind of re-engage with kind of like the like educational aspect of our profession, which students will pour out of. So that's that. And maybe just quickly as like a tertiary, right? Like there's this kind of third space where I spend a lot of time outside of work making space like reflect and consider the value set and alignment from the work I do. Some of this is like professional magazines. Some of it are like truly just like feminist zines, but it's like a kind of like it's makes some space to like share thinking back, I think, as well, because I think when we think about our engagement with the discipline, there's often a really clear mission and alignment when we're in a firm, but there's kind of this additional, I would say, narrative that we're all kind of exploring our own professional work, which I have found very enriching, and it's really exciting to bring that along with me to places like Alloy. And then I think just as like a pivot into our Q&A section, these were really kind of like the three themes I think that the three of us were thinking were really kind of critical to the way that we work together, right? It's really focused on expanding the architect's toolkit, about thinking about how we can create value across multiple disciplines. It's also about like what the definition of value means to you, because it's often different depending on your particular context, and how can you leverage very deep strengths that you have in your kind of existing trajectory. That's what we got, guys.
We got.
All right,
Wow.
thank you, all three of you. Yeah, wow. When we started this call, I just asked you all to think about something that was of significance to the trajectory of your career. You've touched upon it a little bit in this presentation, but do you have anything to share with the community here about a moment or a person or a realization? How did a realization come to you that put you on your path? I think we all agree with you that the paths are very meandering and things happen, by chance oftentimes, and we take that chance and we take that opportunity. Are there times when this happened to you?
Yeah, I'll just share one thing from mine, which I talked about, but maybe didn't specifically say it. But I think that not being afraid to try something new was the biggest thing for me. Because it was scary, like going into construction management after spending all this time, 5 years doing architecture school. But then it could surprise you and lead you to like learn more about yourself and what your strengths are. And then again, like talking about leveraging your strengths, like using that. But I would just say like to not be afraid of trying something new, even if it seems like, you're just not sure where it could lead you. So that's one thing I would say.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is it was like really people-based. As I had said, I had started SOM. I thought I'd be there for about a year, and I was working on competitions. And then it was really like, I thought I cared only about like the architectural project of thinking about the ideas of architecture and its contributions. And it was really an engagement with the New York studio and the director at the time, Nicole Dasso in particular, who I felt really enabled me when I, had just started. I didn't know how to put a set together, right? I was like really fresh out of school and was very eager, and I told her, hey, I want to work on this, and she truly supported me in this way and like really like demanded a lot from me, and I rely on that a lot to this day. And it really shaped my like or encourage my continual like, oh, architecture can also be this thing. There's all these different problems to solve. And I think about that a lot. What about you, Tara?
Interestingly, Jen, you may not know, but Nicole was a speaker in our very first season.
You know, I do think I think I saw that. That's awesome. She's awesome.
Yeah,
I-
we sorry, just
Go ahead.
thought we wanted to have a session with Grosso and Dosso.
Yeah, would have been good.
Tara, sorry, go ahead.
No problem. I would just say, when I decided to go to architecture school, I kind of knew that I might end up somewhere else, but I feel like as architects, like you learn so much and you can do so much with that degree. So don't limit yourself to just working for an architecture practice. I think, you know, architects are talented in many ways, and you can go to so many, you can go become a graphic designer, you can become, you know, a developer, you can work for a real estate company. There's so many avenues you can take. So just, if you feel like you're stuck, just remember that you have a lot of skills that can be applied elsewhere, and take the risk if you are looking for something new.
Yes.
So anyone who wants to ask a question, feel free. You really, you know, on your registration answers, what do you want to learn from the seminar? There are some really great questions about what you want to learn from these three amazing women.
And please turn your cameras on.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you can.
and you thankfully solved our tech issues. So yes, please, we'd love to see you. Aileen, oh, would you like to?
Exactly, Aileen, I was going to call on you because you had a good ask. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Aileen. I'm currently a rising junior at University of Buffalo, studying architecture, but I'm born and raised in New York City. So hearing about this project, specifically Allo Block, it's really always fun hearing a project that I'm like, oh, I know this area, like I know this environment, but just also learning, like I really love how like sustainable you guys were trying to make with Allo Block. And finding out that this was like the first electric skyscraper was like a little mind blowing, but also like I have to applaud you guys for like being the first. But like I was surprised there was not one before, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. But anyways, to my question, I just wanted to talk about more. I know Ali went into it a little, talking about like how they're, in order to keep it like still cost efficient, like while being like keeping it cost efficient, even though it's now like all based on electricity, like talking about how the windows, and also just having like thermometers that could be changed like automatically, like how to help with the cost. So I kind of just want to know more about that, how to be sustainable while still reducing the cost.
I'll get a little into that, and Jen, I'm sure you have some other things to weigh in on this, but I think the challenge is there's the operation cost and there's the upfront cost. So there's a lot of what we're doing right now that is costing us a lot upfront, but then we know operationally it's like more efficient. So over the course of owning this building and operating this building, we have a lot of savings compared to what we would have been spending with the traditional gas system. So there's a lot of things that we made, which we know are cost up front, but we are, you know, all the studies that we have done have shown that it will be more cost efficient down the line. So that's just something that you have to think about both sides of it and balance it out.
So Ali, quick question following on that. Is the State Street building being held indefinitely by Alloy, or will it be sold?
Being held indefinitely.
Yes.
So are all the rental properties being develop and hold?
So this is our first ever rental property, which I talked about a little bit. So we had typically just done condos and a lot smaller scale. So this is our first rental and largest project to date. So it's something new for us, but I think that is the new trajectory for Alloy. Will be looking a lot more like that.
Sure.
It's also kind of like the classic startup development model, right? Like you have to start in for sale product because you're putting money in, you're carrying overhead for a couple of years and you need it back, right? You need the rewards of the condominium project back such that you can reinvest and continue to build it. It takes
Mhm.
time, I think, and it takes a couple of projects to get to scale. But ultimately, the rental is actually more valuable if you're holding it in the long term.
Of
So
course.
as we've built that capacity, it's been exciting.
Yeah, that's a great
Well,
point,
and of
Jen.
course, that rent stream provides income that allows you to develop more projects down the line.
Also,
The other thing I was
you never
Mhm.
mentioned that the first building was not a rental residential building. It was more office spaces. And you had to pivot and completely redesign the building. That you haven't mentioned, but
Yeah, that's right. When the first phase, right, when the pandemic hit, it was 2020, we were at, I don't know, like 80% construction documents. And we were working to form our GMP, which is basically like, okay, let's fund this thing. It was March of 2020, and our kind of equity partners gave us an indication that they wouldn't fund the commercial. So it generated, call it a restack, right? We had effectively had to remove all of the office, transfer it to the second phase, and replace it with residential. So there was a bit of redesign, but we're good at redesign. We can do it really efficiently because we have all of us in the same place and we can make decisions very quickly. So it was, maybe a month's process, not a year process. I was just going to address the other question about like the cost and the design, and because it all feels like trade-offs. And the breakthrough there for me is like around, in a way, in like the broadest sense of the term, like confidence, right? Like the example relative to Ali, the first photo that you showed about like exposing all of the concrete, like the kind of classic marketing reaction is like, oh, people are going to hate that. That's never going to lease, right? But we were able to, from a design perspective, because we're also designers and architects, as well as leasing our own product, like we had confidence, like this is actually beautiful. This is rough and gnarly, and like we like that. So it's like, because you can see the other sides or the other dimensions of the project, you can build confidence that like, okay, yeah, like I actually am not worried about this one, like call it more traditional mentality. In this regard, it was marketing, sorry, Tara, but like it's often like a design thing or like actually things is going to be more expensive. So it bounces around like that.
Yeah, even the induction cooktops, that was like, we were concerned at first. We were doing all these surveys because no projects in New York had induction cooktops at the time. We made that choice to do that. And it's kind of crazy because it's more efficient, it's better for your health. But some people are just resistant to change and learning to use new pots and pans and things like that. But we made this decision, and now we're finding that people actually like seek that out. So,
cool.
Dalen, you had asked a question in your response on registration that I think is interesting, that kind of follows about the discussions we've had about the design process and what kind of career paths led Jen, Tara, and Ali to Alloy. But in your question, you also asked what defines Alloy as being different from other firms, traditional architecture firms. You touched a bit on that, all three speakers have, but did that come as a surprise? Were there opportunities? And some of you worked in some architecture firms briefly. How would you say this compares to what architecture firms offer, even though, they're not the owners of their buildings that they're designing?
I mean, I'll start maybe just by saying like you are your own client, which is a big difference in the end because we are the owner. So we're designing for ourselves. The nice part about that is that when it comes time to like value engineer the project, obviously that always happens and you have to go through and figure out what stays and what goes, but we're also operating on this architecture design lens so that we like care about the end goal a lot more essentially than, and maybe that's more looking at a development company lens. But yeah, I think first and foremost, we're presenting to ourselves and we're our own client.
I think that's totally right. And in an architecture firm, you don't like I come back to the idea of like control. Like you have more control and it's incredibly enabling and energizing, I find, right? Because it's like you have to have a rationale of why you think something's important to be able to want to like fund it. So you have to like believe in the future of the project, which is different, I think, than just being just an like you're being hired with a program already in place and a site already in place. You're not seeking out the problem that you are then solving. And that's like it's a broader problem to solve, and it's, I think, exciting in that regard.
No, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was that was amazing to just see the projects you've done, which look great and seem to be really principled in the way they just carry their ideas all the way through. And Jennifer, you sort of touched on it. Like I work as an architect on the corporate side, but I'm working only on a slice of the project because someone else does the program and the schedule and the budget and comes to me. And then after the design is done, I pass it on to another team that does the construction. So it's very difficult to control the beginning and the end of the projects. And I'm wondering, like, the three of you, with your insight about all three steps, what do you look for in architects that you work with, or what would help architects to understand as they're focused on design or focused on CDs? Like, what are we missing, or what better ways are there to shape a program or work with a client or manage construction?
That's a good one. I like it. You know, we often, I think when we're working with consultants, and like Tara had mentioned, we had hired ARO and ILA to work with on the school. There's a certain level of like, I think the thing that we look for is an architect who would answer the problem as if it was their own money, right? It's kind of like, okay, like if this is your risk, your ass on the line, like, would you do this? And like being able to like position that, I think the problem changes. It's not like necessarily I'm spending this many hours, but I'm going to find the most efficient solution if that's the thing that we're solving for in this particular moment, right? So it's kind of like a stepping into the shoes, or the ability to step into the shoes of an owner, that is incredibly valuable. There's also a certain level of communication. Like we are friends, we have spouses at ARO, and we know how they operate. So we like to work with them because they're incredibly communicative to us. They're beautiful, incredible designers, but it's also about them being people at the end of the day. And it makes our communications and like the office a good place to work in and to work with them, I think. So like being human's good too. Yes.
I'll just add to that, because while we don't hire, like we have like these one-off cases where we hire architects, but we're still always hiring consultants or a construction manager. And it really falls under like the same kind of concept of we want all of our consultants to treat this project like it's their only project. Because it is like we only have like one project going on at a time or two at different phases. And so it really is like the one thing that we're all focusing on. And we want that same kind of dedication from someone, even though we know that like they do have multiple projects they're working on. Like just show us that you're giving that same attention that we're putting into it. And like it just, you have to build that trust. So if they treat it like it's their only project, it definitely helps.
Great, that's good to know. Good to hear.
What Nalina is not telling you is that she's working on the client side as an architect at Tiffany's in their building redesign. So she's knowledgeable in that way, and she spoke in the past to our community about the conversations she needs to have with people to realize the vision, but also to look in the future. And Nalina, I'm speaking for you. You can take me up on this, but I've heard Jen and Ali and Tara speak about the development. Because the Alloy is the owner, they're looking with the long view. How will this perform over time? You know, how will it hold up? You know, how will those investments pay off over time? Which I think you are mostly focused on in those decisions at Tiffany's, right?
It's a little bit different. I mean, you know, ultimately we're all serving clients, whether those clients are internal or external. So like you working at Alloy, my clients are internal. But my corporation is retail and it's profits driven. And it's very obsessed with the image. You showed some very beautiful photographs of spaces inside Alloy buildings, which is a little bit different than a brand image, or how is it related to brand image? Because there's a consistency that I see in Alloy work. So but the brand image is coming maybe from materiality or integrity of the space or proportions. Whereas in retail, it's a little more slippery. What the brand image is and what the design serves ultimately. So it's just something to ponder.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I like that a lot because, I mean, we do our own, call it branding and like graphic exercises. Like we did the graphic design for the Elizabeth Jennings School. No one asked us to do that, but I think it comes back to this kind of core thing that we think about a lot in our design, which is like, what is it communicating? And often it's not necessarily about Alloy, although a lot of our work looks the same, but it's about like, what is this building, this built thing communicating to the broader the audience, being like the neighborhood, the people around us, the people who are looking for units. So it's very, like, I think of it like a brand in that way, right? Where it's like, to Tara's point about people will start to seek out sustainable living to live with their design values. Like that's brand thinking in my take at it. I don't know what you think, Tara.
And by the way, yeah, I was just gonna say, most of our branding, we're like the anti-marketing campaign where we cannot say that this is a luxury project. We just want to present the facts, and that's how we market our projects, because we try to just simplify it, make it clear, make it understandable, make it easy to use, make it beautiful, hopefully pleasing to everyone. That's kind of been our kind of marketing strategy, which is different than most.
On that subject, Tara, while you were speaking about your career path, I was curious to hear more about that transition of roles within Alloy, that you started in design and architecture and your role changed to marketing and sales. Is that where your personality led you? Is that where the firm needed some people and you just said, I'll try that? Or how did that happen?
That's a good question. I had, some experience working in real estate at that brokerage firm, although I didn't do anything related to sales there, really. It was more kind of consulting and on projects, but I did work a lot on floor plans and things of that nature. So I still very much get involved in the beginning of the projects, working through layouts, floor plans, trying to make it kind of the most efficient, but a really nice plan as we can. So I still kind of do that. And for some reason, when you're selling the project or leasing the project, that kind of like origin story of like how we came about and what we're about kind of just translates well to that. I think when we were first starting out and Alloy was really small, we kind of were Swiss Army knives and everyone had to be nimble and do different things. So I kind of took on that role a bit and then kind of just ran with it. I do enjoy it. I like that, I'm not doing AutoCAD every day. I'm doing multiple things. So I think, I don't know, it was kind of a bit of a natural evolution. But some days I miss doing more design stuff. But I think there's a nice balance of where I get to do that. But yeah, it was a bit of a natural evolution that happened.
I have another question. If no one else wants to, everyone is welcome to raise your hand, ask your question in the chat, unmute yourself. But Ali, I'm really impressed with, construction management for the background and the curiosity that you had in your early years and the education path, that parallel paths all of you showed us. How you really embraced construction management and how you, all three of you, are really enjoying your roles, whatever they are and however they evolve. Is there anything you miss doing, Ali, or that you're curious about, trying something new, or are you comfortable where you are and comfort is good?
No, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer in two different ways, kind of. So one thing, like when I went into construction management and still like where I'm at now, as I mentioned before, I was an architecture and an art major. So one thing that I make sure that I have to do for myself in order to feel that balance of like the creativity and also like the professional interest needs is I still try to do a lot of art on the side as much as I can. And when there is an imbalance, if I'm not doing enough of that, then I start to feel a little bit like, I don't want to say unhappy at work, but it's requires that balance for me just to have that like creative and like professional interest, like trajectory at the same time. So that is something that I like constantly am like teetering or struggling to balance, because sometimes it just like while I was in grad school, there was no time for that. But grad school is like a little bit more creative, so I had that outlet. But that is something that I'm constantly trying to balance in order to keep like my interests just like aligned. I think when I first came to Alloy after doing my master's degree, I did not think that I was going to be in another similar construction type of role. I was like, okay, I'm going to be like a development associate. And I still also don't even know what that is. Like, that's a very broad thing. Like, you could be doing, underwriting, acquisitions, doing massing models. Like, there's a ton of different things that fall in that world. And so I was like, I don't know, I'll do that. But then this job kind of fell into my lap, and I was like, you know what? Like, I am good at that. Like, I've been doing it for years, and it is still like, it's a growth. It's not like I'm just staying stagnant of where I was. It's working like a totally different company. It's smaller, so it's like everyone's more hands-on with everything. So whereas I definitely thought I was going to take another pivot, and I didn't. So like, it's still, there's like still more growth to be had there. So I don't really necessarily, like Tara said, miss like doing design stuff, because I just try to do that on my own, but it is like a constant struggle that you have to have with yourself. And like Jen was talking about, having your extracurriculars to balance those kinds of things out, because your career can't fulfill every aspect of your life, so like you have to have those like side hustles or like, different interests that can help balance that out. So I think that's really how I've found my way of finding my happiness in work. Is Angelique trying to? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just calling on Aileen. I realized you have another question. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on from this, from what you guys are saying, and also like from the whole like moral, like what you with this presentation about like becoming a versatile architect and such like that. I just kind of want to know the steps you guys take and ensure like you are focusing more like what exactly are the stuff you are focusing when you want to focus on your creative stuff? Like, what are those things? Or like, what are other ways that you focus on ensuring that you still have like those skills in AutoCAD and such, and just making sure you're overall like versatile?
Well, I'll start off on that one, because like that's a very, like, I don't spend that much time in AutoCAD anymore, but there are like every once in a while, I'll, like, find something like a weird floor plan. I'm like, oh, should we do it like this? And I'll just like mess around with it for fun. And I'm like, it feels good. You're like, oh, I can still do it. It's still there. And I do think like there's some coordination stuff that I spent some time doing while I was at Structure Tone still, actually, but it was like taking all the 3D models and helping coordinate that. So again, I'm not in AutoCAD designing, but there were things like that I was like getting more into the model and like working with it. And it's that is very fun to get to do every once in a while, even though I don't do it every day. But I think you do kind of have to like find reasons to do it, even if like you don't have to for work, but like you want to keep that fresh. Like one thing that I think all of us are trying to spend more time on too, which is not architecture, but like is doing underwriting. And it's hard to sometimes find the time because you do have to put work first, and that is not what I'm getting paid to do. So I have to find time outside of work. And it's like, you know, sometimes you go like through these ebbs and flows of finding the time for it. And then when you just have to try to find, like, you have to try to carve it out, but it's also like, give yourself some grace when you can't always do that, because it's not always going to work out perfectly that you have 2 hours a day extra to spend on something.
Yeah, building on that, I would love to hear from the three of you about how you work with the other members of your team. I know you just mentioned, Ali, you just mentioned underwriting. You guys spoke a bit earlier about the money you spend up front and things like Passive House. You know, when you do have to basically, you know, gather additional funds potentially from investors, or, you know, when you need loans from banks and you need to sell other people on this mission. I guess I just wonder how you work with the other members of your team on kind of selling the value of what it is that you are, of the mission, really, of the way you guys are approaching every development in your portfolio at this point. And that includes, I mean, other stakeholders, including the residents that may not fully understand what Passive House is or how it affects them or why it's good for their community. I guess I'd just love to know a bit more about how you work with the rest of your team and all the stakeholders that you engage to get them on board with this mission and like moving forward with you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I think we spend like the most time trying to make an idea communicable, right? So like with this second phase, right, we're in CDs now, but we're making like really big systemic decisions. And when we're doing that, we're thinking about who like will get this? Like, will an investor understand why this is a long-term like benefit to them? Will a tenant understand that? So to an extent, we're not Durst, right? Like we can't just throw money at a problem. So we have to be very selective about the things that we want to achieve. That's why they have like these, I think like tweet length type of things, like first all electric tower, first Passive House school, like it's very easily understood. And we spend a lot of time trying to galvanize design and like development decisions, like I think around that. Like that's the at the core of what we do. We're trying to like galvanize an idea for the building. How does the team work? Like we have the way I kind of think about it is like we have core competencies like architectural production, cost estimating, underwriting. Like we're not all in the model at the same time. And it really, like we talk about this term creative abrasion, where we're in a design meeting and we're trying to make decisions about where floors want to go and where the value is relative to retailers. And that all kind of gets like, I don't know, like hashed out, I would say together. And you have to be able to like you have to know enough to be dangerous in these like other things. I have to have a good sensibility around what Tara's seeking from a leasing perspective, or another colleague, Mac, who really is like, he really drives the like the model or the underwriting, right? About where we're trying to like seek value relative to either retail or office or resi. Like we have to understand the desires of each other, but we have to also like hash it out to really like, come to the best decision together. It's in the collaboration process, which is really messy, right? Like it has to be messy. So it feels really different from an architecture firm in that way.
But I'll say the office is very open, hands-on, and like best idea wins. Whoever it comes from, everyone is pretty like humble in that sense. And I feel like we all, like each project that we do, an idea from like everyone has gone into it. So it's like a collective.
Do you
goal.
collectively decide which is the best idea?
Yeah,
We
pretty
do.
much.
It changes. Like we have done like literally there is a division and we can't decide, and you have to like literally, like we did one last week where like there is a division in who thinks the more valuable unit type is, vote on this doodle. Like turns out we tied and we have to do half and half.
It's just too perfect. I was like, this is rigged. 8 and 8.
There's certain things that are immovable. Like the model has to be financeable. The egress has to work. Like there's certain things that are immovable, I think, in that regard, and they have to come together. So it's like not always like whatever we think wins. Like we have to
The
be able to
economics have to
rationalize a
work.
position, and that yeah. No, like it does require being vocal, for sure.
When I did the tour of the Alloy Block with you, you mentioned that you partnered with the coffee guy for the retail space. And did he approach you? I forget, or did you approach him? He approached you and said, I want to sell coffee, and then you designed the space for him? Or how did that happen? I wonder, I think I remember it being a wonderful story, but also that you had agency over who occupies the space and how it will be used.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Our vice president, Jeff, lives in Sunset Park, and he gets his coffee from his local shop every day. And we knew we had this like really tiny spot in our residential lobby, and we're like, kind of wanted to be coffee or broth or something that would feel like an amenity, right? It's not really about being income producing, but community matters, and like cultivating vibes, if you will, around like the residents' experience matters. We like care about like you not being like greeted when you get your coffee with a frown. We like liked these guys. Jeff gets his coffee every day. So he's like, hey, these guys would be great. And you know, it's kind of those moments of like mission alignment where you can like where you know you have like great partners, or you can create opportunities for partners. In this case, it's like a coffee shop that it's like, sure, yeah, like I can like let me look at expanding, like let me see what that will mean to my business. And you can kind of create those small opportunities in a way. That was the coffee. That was the coffee shop. So like we cover the TI, like we cover the tenant improvements, if you will. Like again, it's like a really small shop. It's not income producing. It's like kind of the front door of the building. So we wanted to like invest in like the appearance of it. So that was all us, and they have like a small lease that's based on how
And
much
they're a
coffee.
small local shop with like a really amazing story.
Yeah.
And we want to, as much as we can, like support local organizations and things like that. It doesn't always work out that way, but we try as much as we can.
Well, it sounds like you're always looking for and creating opportunities, and sometimes they're hard to predict ahead of time because how many businesses can fit into a 150 square foot space?
Don't be shy, everyone. Anyone else have any questions while we have the benefit of Jen, Tara, and Allie's time?
I'm gonna turn on the light.
Well, I'm happy to free associate a little bit, having started out in architecture and design and then moved on to the business end of the industry, and now being involved in a development project myself and seeing how difficult it is to make things happen, especially when capital is not readily available. I'm interested in how much and how considered every decision is to put something into the world. And the difference of how when we all started in school, we were designing in the abstract projects on our desk, and there was sort of a context, but not really. And they never really left the desk, and they were made out of chipboard and paper. And, you know, there wasn't really much thought about materiality. And then as you go further on into your career, not so much constraints, but the realities of the world and how things have to be put into the world, whether it's about materiality or construction or cost or code or neighborhood approvals. It's just so interesting how the abstract thought of designing something results in putting something into the world with all of its many constraints. And I'd love to hear you talk about that. Any of you or all of you.
For some reason, when you were talking, it was just making me think of our neighbors across the street from our tower that live in these beautiful brownstones. Most of them have lived in there for so many years. And it was like they were so like blindsided. They're like, you're building a tower in front of our little brownstones. Like, what are you
Yeah.
saying? And now, and we spent a lot of time working, like just meeting with them, and we still throughout the construction process had monthly meetings. Like then they started to trust us more. They would literally be texting or calling my phone for little things, and they just like, you know, took a lot of communication. But now that like once we like topped out and like all the facade was up, they were sending us pictures of how beautiful it was. And like they're like, oh, we thought you were taking away the sky, but instead there's this reflection. And it was just, to me, it was like when you were talking about that, like an abstract thing becoming like, you know, you have to make it real, and like for it's different coming from the design world to think about that abstract thing and like so beautiful. But then when you think about the people who aren't familiar with it, how scary that might be, like they can't picture it. And it just made me think of that. So I just wanted to share a little tidbit of like
Sure.
making
Well,
abstract become real and
and
working. So it's like try to keep people happy. You don't want to like totally disrupt their lives.
one, if I may, just to interject, I think that communicating your vision, you know, your vision might be very detailed and thorough and have a wonderful justification, but communicating that to the community who doesn't have the skills to visualize things or even the language to speak about something that will be or might be, as opposed to what already exists and how things are going to change. And it's one of the hardest things about putting architecture into the city, any city.
Definitely.
We were this is a side a step aside, but the gut reaction I think for developers is, you know, like if it looks like, if you have a hammer, it's going to look like a nail, right? Like you're going to do the thing. So like developers want to put a bunch of shit out. Like you want to produce buildings and put them into the space. And I think there's a certain level of like resisting the gut reaction. We were the thing I'm thinking about is we were approached like, I don't know, a couple of years ago for another like potential really big project with another potential like a pseudo public institution. And when we were looking at this development proposition, and you're thinking about what the problem the owner wanted to solve, it could be solved without development, right? Like actually, like to not do anything at all right now would be best for this institution. So there's also this like pull back from the gut reaction of like wanting to act and like really consider, I think they're really considering what the goal of an owner or another developer would want to be is like incredibly important. My second just thought is just if your vision isn't like landing, then it's probably not the vision for everyone. And there's kind of like you have to step out of your, what I like about the complexity of the development problem is that you have to step out of your own ego because it has to work for everyone else. Like the problem is complicated and the actually really good solutions are the things that solve it for everyone. Like that's where the elegance of good development is, I think, which is really exciting.
Thanks. I think we have another question in the chat.
Yeah. Harushemi, is that how you say your name?
Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question live if you can.
Sure.
Here we go.
Sorry if you can't
Hello.
hear it. Hi. It's Haru Chimwe. If there's still any time, I was wondering what the best way to continue working, whether it's on the portfolio or just trying to stay involved within the industry, even when you're not working at a firm or are in a program studying architecture. Considering there's how few jobs there are sometimes.
It's a good question. Jen, not to put you on the spot, but I feel like you have probably, you're the most able to answer that one.
I mean, I'm just a really big believer in like the extracurricular. It takes time, right? Like you have to be curious and have to spend time doing it. But places like the Urban Land Institute are multidisciplinary. The Urban Design Forum is another one in New York City, which is very interdisciplinary. They're very focused on like public policy issues, and it's a way to like engage the discipline without necessarily like working at a firm. And you learn a ton. You develop a cohort, right? People who like will support you along the way and stuff like that. So the AIA has stuff like I think that like at least going and like trying on the shoes of these different places has a lot to offer. So I mean, I would encourage it. I've found value in it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's also like competitions and things that you could find that's like outside of. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of time after I get home from work.
Yeah.
Because I am a mom of two, but I think, yeah, reaching out, getting to meet people. You can even create your own projects, like in the underwriting and development, like people in our office just seek out their own project and create their own projects on their own, even if they're not real. It could be in a way to.
Yes.
It's a really good point. There's like a certain level of entrepreneurial mindset that is encouraged at Alloy, and I think would benefit architects in general, right? Like when Jared and AJ started Alloy, it was like they were literally going around and like looking at sites and like, what would I do on here? And it's like the kind of self agency around like asking the question of yourself, how would I work out this problem? You start to see more and more opportunities. Like we do that at a smaller, like the challenge of the large scale is like you need to build a machine that can build the large thing, and it requires additional, like you have to exercise the muscle of a smaller development to like continue to learn and develop curiosities around like smaller scale development, which we, as Tara was saying, do some of.
My last question, because we only have 15 minutes left, and I think I'd like to hear from all three of you at each turn, but you know, you're all three well into your second decade in architecture. Your paths have taken you to Alloy, and you see the profession very differently in your mid-career. And you know, if you had to provide a vision of what the second half of your career looks like, what would that be?
Wow. That's a great question and a really hard question. I'm gonna think about it some more, but I just want to say that the reason that it is so hard is because where I am now is not where I would have predicted that I would have been 10 years ago. So like, it's almost impossible. And sometimes I don't like to think about that because I like to just like see where things take me and not try to feel like I'm like then failing myself if I'm not achieving what I envisioned. But like, of course, at the same time, you have to have a vision and have goals to progress. So it's like always that like teetering of like letting yourself just like see where things take you, but also like having something to strive for. Something that like I'm really excited. Like I worked for a really large company before coming to Alloy, and I really enjoyed working at a smaller company. And so for me, I'm like excited, like a lot, like very excited to see how things evolve as it becomes more like the directors that like three of us now on the call with you of like doing like really taking the ownership of like our own project down the line together and like just running with that and like seeing how like you know, for me, I'm like, oh, I would love to say Alloy if we keep this same team that we have now and we grow together and we make that thing. Like, I just think that would be like such a cool thing to look back on as like us starting out as directors together. But like, it was still, you know, we're still learning about each other, but getting to that point where we just have like full trust, like you got this, do that, great. And just like seeing like our kind of own, like our own projects come to life.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think it's awesome that we have this group of people that each have their own little kind of specialty, but when we all come together, we make it all work, and I think growing that group together and kind of evolving as we grow and as our projects get larger. I'm excited to also take on kind of more leadership opportunities, do more things like this, which having two smaller kids, I didn't have a lot of time to do, but now as they're getting older, I feel like I'm finally having more time to do things like that. And just to spend more time outside of the office as well, engaging with different organizations. And Jen is really good at inspiring us to do that as well.
Well, Jen gets the credit for connecting all of you with us because she
Yeah.
reached out and said, hey, I want to know you guys. And I'm so grateful that she did that. So thank you. Yeah, Jen, your turn.
Yeah, it's the best, and it's so funny because you guys, Tara and Ali, are like saying the same thing, which like was the thing that came to my mind, which is all around like the collaboration is the thing. Like it matters the most to me about like working collectively as a team towards a goal, right? Like when you're in flow, like that feels really good, and like that is the thing I get a lot of life out of, right? Is like the kind of building a collaboration, working through it and allowing that to grow. It's like a relationship. It's really important to me. And I hope that continues in my second decade. The thing that I would challenge myself to is also the thing that I didn't do enough in my early career that I wish I had, which is take more risk, right? Like have more on the line. And to an extent, it's great. And I like you can learn a lot working in a firm, but like taking more material risk, I think actually like energizes the problem and brings it like it's going to matter a lot, and you're going to see more opportunity and reward because of it. So it's like I think also in the second half of it, right, is like really like committing to the bit.
That comes with experience and maturity. I feel that, you know, maybe as we graduate from our degrees and are just coming into the profession, we're a bit shy about asking for what we envision or what we strive for. But as we get older, we're much more comfortable saying, hey, I'm passionate about this. Give me this to do because I want to learn, or I don't know enough about it and I really want to know. And you're more comfortable with opening up and saying, you know, I don't know how to do something and I really want to do it.
It's true.
That's really good. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I would just definitely also say to speak up. Like I think for all of us, architecture is not really so male dominated anymore, but the real estate profession and the construction profession are definitely a bit more kind of male dominated fields. And yeah, I would just encourage women in these fields to just speak up and, you know that your voice matters and that you're heard.
Well,
Because
I would add to that, always be on the lookout for your allies, because in those moments when it's a little more difficult, they will carry you through.
that's true.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it sounds like a really nice place to end the evening. Don't you agree?
Yeah. Thanks so much for getting us together. This was really fun.
Yes,
It
thank you
was
for
terrific.
Thank you so much.
spending the
Thank you.
evening with us, and hopefully we'll see you all in September at our
In person.
networking session.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
So much.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.